I haven't slept with my window open in years. Doesn't matter how freaking hot it gets outside, that thing stays shut. Locked tight. It's been this way ever since I was a kid, and let me tell you, it's not exactly a panty dropper in the summer. Most people are all like, dude, just get an AC. And yeah, I do, especially if I've got company. But honestly, even with the AC on, I don't sleep great. My brain just goes into overdrive, thinking about how easy it would be for someone to just pop the screen out and... Yeah, but there's one good thing about the AC. Besides, not melting into a puddle of sweat the hum. It's this constant, steady drone that drowns out the silence. See, I hate the silence. There was a time when it was all peaceful and zen, but now it's just dangerous. It feels like something's creeping in around the edges. And the silence, it never comes alone. Sometimes I can still hear them. The chanting. It's like it's burned into my brain. They're all out there in the woods, chanting their weird, wordless songs in perfect, creepy harmony. It's like the wind before a storm, Rhythmic, but totally messed up. It never really went away, even though I know they all moved on or died or whatever. I know it's all in my head, I do, mostly. So, this all started when I was 9. My dad, Leo, and I were living in this old, 2-family apartment house in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. We had the bottom floor. The top floor was empty. The people who lived there before had just moved out. It was a super quiet neighborhood, lots of trees, and a huge forest right behind our house. I used to play in those woods all the time. My mom, Sarah, had recently divorced my dad, so it was just the 3 of us, me, my dad, and our dog Marley. Marley was named after Bob, the reggae guy. He was an old Scotty, one of those little ankle biter dogs with the scraggly, mean-looking faces. My parents got him when I was a baby, and he was my best friend, my partner in crime. He might have been a total goofball, but he was all I had. I cried my eyes out when Mom tried to take him with her during the divorce. In the end, he stayed with Dad, mainly for my sake. Marley and I, we were inseparable. We spent hours in those woods. When you're a kid, your imagination is, like, your superpower. And those woods were the perfect place to let it run wild. I'd play soldier, build forts, climb trees. One time, Marley and I went so far in that I actually got lost. It was October, so the sun was setting super early, and I started to freak. I was terrified of being stuck out there in the dark. We were running around like headless chickens, trying to find something, anything familiar, when I saw it at clearing with a big rock in the middle. Now, you see graffiti in the woods all the time, right? Names carved into trees, dumb stuff like that. I figured this was just another hangout spot for older kids. But something felt wrong. Really wrong. I mean, I was only 9, so I didn't really get what all the symbols and stuff meant. But even I could tell this was different. The trees around the clearing were covered in these drawings. They looked like, I don't know, a goat man thing. Like a stick figure, but with a goat's head drawn on it, really detailed. Too much for a stick man, These things were everywhere, all over the trees, not just at eye level, but way up high too. It was like whoever drew them was obsessed. And the rock, it had these red markings all over it. Letters, but not like any letters I'd ever seen. Underneath, though, there was a message, written in black spray paint, that I could actually read. It said, "Behold the wisdom of the horned." Below that were 5 lines, all the same height, except the 2 on the ends, which were twice as tall and spiraled out at the top. But the thing that really freaked me out were the dolls. They were hanging from the branches all around the clearing. They were made of sticks, really crudely made, like a kindergartner's art project. But when I looked closer, I saw what was so messed up about them. The bodies were just sticks, yeah, but the heads, they were skulls, animal skulls, bleached white, totally clean, with these empty eye sockets that just stared. I know this sounds crazy, but I swear those dolls were watching me. I could feel it, and they were scared. Not my fear, but theirs. Like when you know you're in deep trouble. Ever been at a party that gets busted by the cops? It was that kind of fear, times a million. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was just a curious kid. But I reached up and touched one of the dolls. Maybe I thought if I touched it, it would just be a doll, not some creepy, watchful spirit thing. The second my fingers brushed against it, the skull fell off. The whole thing just unraveled. The skull cracked when it hit the ground, and in that moment I knew, with a certainty that only a 9-year-old can have, that I didn't belong there. But at the time there was some relief. The spell was broken, it felt like. Marley started barking like crazy, and it scared me so bad I screamed. I looked up, and the sky was that weird, orangey red color it gets right before it gets dark. I had to get out of there. Marley was staring at me, his little black eyes wide, his tail wagging like he was trying to tell me something. Then he started to growl at nothing, at everything I don't know. When I went over to him, he took off running. I wasn't about to be left alone in that creepy place, so I chased after him. The last thing I saw before I ran was something that still messes me up to this day. All the other dolls, the ones that were hanging there when I first got to the clearing, they had been swaying a little, in the breeze. But as I ran after Marley, I saw that every single one of them was completely still, and they were all facing me. But I was too scared to think about that then. I just wanted to get out of there. I ran like hell, and I never let Marley out of my sight. He led me straight home. I never loved that dog more than I did at that moment. Later, before bed, I told my dad what I saw. He just laughed and said it was probably just some teenagers messing around, and that I should forget about it. For a little while, I almost did. I even managed to fall asleep without any trouble. But that night, that was when I heard it for the first time. The sound that would change everything. The sound that still haunts me. I woke up in the middle of the night. It was one of those wake-ups where you're instantly alert, No grogginess, just awake. And I could hear something. At first, I thought it was just the usual night sounds. But then I realized it was coming from outside, from the woods. I got out of bed and went to the window. That's when I heard it clearly chanting. It was like a bunch of voices, all chant in unison. It wasn't super loud, but it was definitely there. And it was rhythmic, like a song, but a really, really creepy song. I couldn't make out any words, but it sounded dark. Like something you'd hear in a horror movie, not in your backyard. My mind immediately flashed back to that clearing, the rock, the dolls, the whole messed up scene. I just knew, that the chanting was coming from there. And the worst part, it didn't sound that far away, like at all. The chanting went on for hours. I just lay there in bed, frozen, listening to it. I wanted to close the window to block it out, but I was too scared. It's weird, I know, but I had this crazy idea that if I closed the window, I wouldn't be able to hear them if they decided to come for me. Yeah, it's messed up logic, but I was 9, okay? My brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders. I figured at least if they were chanting while approaching, it would give me some warning. So, I just stayed there, listening to those creepy voices until like 4 in the morning when the birds finally started waking up. Finally, it stopped. Needless to say, I stopped playing in the woods after that. My dad noticed, of course. He kept asking me what was wrong, and I finally broke down and told him about the chanting. He just shrugged it off, same as before. Said it was probably just teenagers having a party, drinking beers, being loud. But Dad, I said, why would they drink beer and make the same sound for 5 hours straight? He just told me I was imagining things, that there was no chanting, and that I should just keep my window closed from now on. I probably should have listened to him, but I don't know. Curiosity maybe, or maybe I was just a dumb kid. The next night, the chanting started up again, right at 11 o'clock, like clockwork. It seemed even louder this time. I couldn't sleep, but I still couldn't bring myself to close the window. I was terrified, but I needed to hear them. I needed to know if they were coming. This went on for days. Every night, 11 to 4, the chanting. Sometimes, I'd see this faint glow in the woods, like a fire, but it was so far away and so quick that I wasn't sure if it was real or just my eyes playing tricks on me. Some nights, I'd manage to fall asleep from sheer exhaustion, only to wake up a few hours later in a panic, the chanting still going on. Finally, I begged my dad to let Marley sleep in my room. I figured if I could hear them coming, Marley would too. He'd be my furry little alarm system, barking his head off if anyone got near the house. Dad said it was fine, and I felt this huge wave of relief. I actually thought I might get some sleep that night. I fell asleep around 8, with Marley curled up at the foot of my bed. I woke up at 11, to Marley going absolutely nuts. He was up on his hind legs, tail wagging like crazy, barking at the window. I jumped out of bed and looked out. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But Marley was freaking out, growling, looking at me, then back at the window, barking like his life depended on it. And the chanting. It was still going on, same as the past few nights. I remember feeling this knot in my stomach. If Marley was this agitated, then the treat was real. Did they hear him? Was he giving us away? I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. Then my dad came in, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. He was still half asleep. He just scooped up Marley, mumbled something about him shutting the hell up, and started to walk out of the room. "Dad!" I yelled. He was so out of it, he didn't even react. "Dad, the woods!" I screamed it this time. That got his attention. He turned around, walked over to the window, and looked out. Then he looked back at me. "This again," he mumbled. "No, listen." That's what Marley's barking at. There are people out there, singing, just listen. He looked out the window again, longer this time. Marley was still growling in his arms, his head turned towards the window. I listened too. Nothing. Complete and utter silence. I couldn't believe it. Was I going crazy? Was this all some kind of messed up dream? My dad told me to go back to sleep and left the room, still muttering about Marley. The silence was worse than the chanting, way worse. At least when they were chanting, I knew where they were. Now it was like they could be anywhere. And the worst part, the part that really freaked me out, was that there were no crickets. Usually, at that time of year, the crickets were deafening. Even when the chanting was going on, I could still hear them. But now, nothing. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. I don't know how long I stared out that window. When I woke up the next day, I was still sitting in the chair by the window. That morning, at breakfast, I tried to tell my dad again about the chanting, about the silence, but he wasn't having it. He told me he didn't want to hear another word about it, that I needed to grow up and stop being so scared all the time. You know, typical dad stuff. I didn't even bother mentioning the crickets. he'd just come up with some explanation for that, too. So, I just kept my mouth shut and ate my cereal. I was starting to feel like I was losing it. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Later that day, I was waiting outside for my mom, Sarah, to pick me up. She had me on weekends, and she was taking me to my grandma's house, where she was staying. I was just standing there, at the end of the driveway, lost in my own little world, when this big, black pickup truck drove by. Really slowly, it stopped right in front of me. There were two guys in the truck, both of them older, probably around my dad's age. At first, I thought maybe they were friends of his, but that thought didn't last long. The driver rolled down his window and just stared at me. He was bald, and he was wearing these weird, thin sunglasses, even though it wasn't that sunny. He had a little cigar thing in his mouth, and I remember the smell of it, really strong and kind of gross. He just kept looking at me, like he was trying to figure something out, or like he was sizing me up. Finally, he smiled, this really creepy smile, and then he nudged his friend in the passenger seat and pointed at me. The other guy, he was bald and wearing the same sunglasses, too. They said something to each other. I couldn't hear what, and then the driver looked back at me, still with that creepy smile, and slowly drove away, waving at me as he went. It was super weird, and it didn't stop there. They drove past me 3 more times before my mom finally showed up. Each time they slowed down, stared at me, and then drove off. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't give those guys much thought after that. I was just relieved to be going to my grandma's house, somewhere away from the woods and the chanting and the whole messed up situation. The weekend was fine, actually. Pretty normal. Grandma's house was safe, quiet. When I told Mom and Grandma about the voices in the woods, they just gave each other this look. You know, the kind of look that adults give each other when they think a kid is making stuff up. They told me to talk to Dad about it. I tried to explain that I had talked to Dad, that he didn't believe me, but it was pointless. They were just like him, convinced I was imagining things. The whole time, though, I couldn't shake the memory of those 2 guys in the truck, or the chanting in the woods. I knew deep down that something wasn't right. Sunday night came, and Mom dropped me back off at Dad's. All day I'd been dreading it, dreading the night, dreading the possibility of hearing those voices again. I begged my dad to let me keep Marley in my room, but he said no. So, come bedtime, I was back in my chair by the window, staring out into the darkness, waiting. I stayed up until 11, fully expecting the chanting to start, but nothing. Silence. No singing, no crickets, just that same heavy silence. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. Maybe they were gone. Maybe they'd moved on to somewhere else. It took a while, but I finally managed to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it was over. I crawled into bed and closed my eyes, feeling a tiny bit of hope. Then I woke up to the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It was like a nightmare, but I was wide awake. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I was instantly, completely alert. A rough, cold hand clamped over my mouth, shoving my face into the mattress. I felt someone on top of me, someone heavy, and then this sharp, stabbing pain in my stomach as a knee slammed into me. I was yanked out of bed and forced to stand. The hand was still over my mouth, and my left arm was twisted behind my back, pulled up so high I thought it was going to break. "Sheh." A voice whispered in my ear, his breath cold and smelling like something rotten. "Yes," another voice said from across the room. My eyes had adjusted to the dark. and through the moonlight coming in through my now open window, I saw him. A man standing there, wearing the most horrible mask I'd ever seen. At first I thought it was a goat's head, but then I realized it was a goat's head, a real one. But it wasn't stuffed or anything, it was just raw, rotted. The horns curled up, and there were patches where the fur was missing, showing bare, blistered skin. It had these dead, glassy eyes that just stared. I tried to scream, but the hand over my mouth just tightened its grip. My arm felt like it was about to snap. "Scream, and we will kill you," the voice in my ear whispered again. I couldn't look away from the goat head guy. He was shirtless, and he had this necklace on, made of bones, I think. He was skinny, like really skinny, and he had these markings all over his chest and stomach. In one hand, he held a knife, a big one, bigger than any kitchen knife I'd ever seen. And it didn't look like a normal knife, either. He took a step closer and pressed the knife against my throat. The cold steel sent a shiver down my spine. I just knew that one wrong move, and that was it. In his other hand, he held a candle. A plain, white candle. "Tomorrow," the goat head guy said, his voice muffled by the mask, "you will exit your house at midnight. You will light this candle, place it on the ground in the center of your yard, and you will sit behind it, legs crossed. Right foot on top of your left knee, and vice versa. If you don't do this," the voice in my ear finished the sentence, "the blood of your loved ones will be on your hands." Then, just like that, the goat head guy pulled the knife away from my throat. And everything went black. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed, gasping for air, crying. My dad rushed in, asking what was wrong. I told him everything about the men, the goat head, the knife, the candle, everything. But he just said it was a nightmare, a bad dream. He sat down on the edge of my bed, and he looked so tired, so defeated. He told me that it was probably just stress from the divorce, that maybe we should talk to a therapist, someone who could help me deal with these hallucinations. I felt so betrayed, so alone. I tried to tell him it was real, that it all really happened, but he wouldn't listen. He and Mom had already talked about it, apparently. They thought I was losing it because of the divorce. Their minds were made up. Nothing I said could change that. And looking back, I guess it makes sense. Who would believe a 9-year-old kid talking about men with goat heads and threats? Of course they thought I was crazy. The next day, I was like a zombie. I barely spoke to my dad, Leo. He tried to talk to me, but I just couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I just saw the goat head guy, heard that voice whispering in my ear, "The blood of your loved ones will be on your hands." Marley, my dog, stayed with me all day, like he knew something was wrong. He just sat there in my room, watching me with those big, brown eyes. I spent most of the day playing video games, trying to distract myself, but it was no use. Every few minutes, I'd find myself staring out the window, half expecting to see them out there, watching me. My dad, he just looked lost. He kept walking past my room, glancing in, but he didn't say much. He spent most of the day on the phone. I figured he was talking to my mom, Sarah, about me, about how I was losing it. But later that day, I remembered what the goat head guy had said about the candle. I was supposed to light it at midnight. But when I woke up that morning, there was no candle in my room. I searched everywhere, under my bed, in my closet, even in the drawers, nothing. A tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, it had all been a dream. A really messed up, vivid dream, but still just a dream. Maybe I was off the hook. Maybe I wouldn't have to do whatever it was they wanted me to do. The relief I felt was incredible. It was like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in days, I felt almost normal. Even the thought of seeing a shrink didn't seem so bad compared to the alternative. As the day wore on, I started to believe it. Maybe the whole thing really was just a dream. Maybe those weirdos in the woods had moved on, and the goat man was just some figment of my imagination, my brain's way of coping with all the stress. Nightfall came, and for the first time in a week, I wasn't terrified. I actually felt okay. Like things were finally going back to normal. I was so wrong. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when I felt something under my pillow. Something hard and smooth. I reached under and pulled it out. It was a candle. A tall, thin red wax candle with a long wick. My heart sank. The blood drained from my face. Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't a dream. It was all real. In that moment, I relived the whole thing all over again. The cold hand on my mouth, the knife at my throat, the goat head, the whispered threats. It all came flooding back. How did the candle get there? Had I missed it before? Or had they been in my room again? I lay there in bed, staring at the candle until midnight. I didn't dare close my eyes, terrified that if I did, they'd be there again, standing over me. The night was silent. No crickets, no birds, nothing. Just that dead, heavy silence. I watched the clock, the minutes ticking by, each one feeling like an eternity. 158, 159, midnight. I looked out the window, and there they were, standing at the edge of the woods, shadowy figures in the darkness. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were there. And in the center, him, the goat man. They were waiting for me. They knew I'd come. They had killed my dog, threatened me, broken me. They knew I was too scared to disobey them. I grabbed the candle and walked outside. The darkness felt thicker than usual, and the air was filled with this horrible smell, like sour milk and rotting meat. My skin crawled, and I felt like I was going to throw up. As I stepped into the yard, the motion sensor light clicked on, flooding the area with a harsh, white light. For a second, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe, just maybe, the light would keep them away. I lit the candle with my dad's lighter and placed it on the ground, just like the goat man had told me to. I was about to sit down, to cross my legs like he'd instructed when I saw it. Two glowing green eyes. They were in the woods, reflecting the light from the backyard. They were high up, too high to be a dog or even a person. And they were moving, pacing back and forth. I could hear it breathing, this ragged, wheezing sound. And with each breath, I could smell that awful stench, even stronger now. I was frozen, paralyzed with fear. I knew somehow that any sudden movement would send this thing charging at me. It kept pacing, never leaving the edge of the woods, never breaking eye contact with me. Every now and then, it would stop and lower itself to the ground, like a cat getting ready to pounce. It would stay like that for a few seconds, then rise back up and start pacing again. Then I realized. The light. It was stopping it. The motion sensor light. But I knew that light had a timer, and when that timer ran out, with every ounce of courage I had left, I forced myself to stand up. The eyes stopped moving. They narrowed, I think. I could feel its rage, its frustration. I took a step back, and it took a step forward into the light. It was tall and thin, and it had horns, long, curling horns, just like the goat man's mask. I don't remember running back to the house. I don't remember making it inside. All I remember is the light shutting off, the darkness closing in, and this horrible, blood-curdling scream. I don't know if it was the creature's scream or mine. The next thing I remember is waking up in my dad's arms. He was holding me, rocking me back and forth. My mom, Sarah, was there too, kneeling beside us. I was sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. They told me later that I was screaming, "Don't let it get me. Don't let it get my," over and over again. I don't remember that. I don't remember anything after the light went out. They tried to tell me it was just a nightmare, that nothing had happened. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what was out there. The next day, they took me outside into the backyard. They wanted to show me that there was nothing there, that it was all in my head. But then we saw it. The grass was all messed up, like something heavy had been dragged through it. And there were these marks on the trees, deep gouges in the bark. I knew instantly what they were. "It was just a deer, Alex," my dad, Leo, said, his voice strained. "He was trying so hard to make it all okay, to make it all go away. It probably got spooked by the light and ran through here. See, these are from its antlers." He even found some fur caught on a branch, claiming it was deer fur. It was such a neat, convenient explanation, and I wanted more than anything to believe him, but I couldn't. A few weeks later, I heard about a missing person. They were searching for him in the woods behind our house. I wanted to tell someone, to tell them what I knew, but my dad and my therapist stopped me. They said it would only make things worse, that it would enable my tendencies, as they put it. See, they had diagnosed me with schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia to be exact. They said it was because of the divorce, that I felt responsible for my family falling apart, and that my young mind couldn't handle the guilt. They said the cultists, the goat man, the creature in the woods, they were all just symbols, my brain's way of coping. For a while, I believed them. It was easier that way. The lies were comforting, safe. I played along, told them what they wanted to hear. I went to therapy, took the medication they gave me, and pretended that everything was fine. Years later, they told me I was cured, that I had made a full recovery. It was easy to keep up the charade, since I hadn't had another episode since that night. By that point, I was so angry with them, with the doctors, with everyone. I learned to just tell them what they wanted to hear. When I turned 18, I cut ties with my parents. I moved out of state, changed my name, and tried to leave everything behind. But I couldn't. I had to know. I went back to Bridgewater. I spent days in the town archives, digging through old newspapers, police reports, anything I could find. And I found it. The missing person case. The man they had been searching for in the woods. They found him, eventually, or what was left of him. He was torn apart, his limbs ripped off, his internal organs missing. And he was wearing a mask. A mask made from the head of a ram, hollowed out so it could fit over a human head. When they removed the mask, they saw that his face was frozen in a look of pure terror. It should have scared me, but in a way, it was almost a relief reading that report. It confirmed what I already knew. It wasn't all in my head. I like to think that those people in the woods, they were a cult. That they were trying to summon something, some ancient evil, and that I messed up their ritual somehow. Maybe by touching that doll all those years ago. Or by failing to complete their instructions, failing to offer myself to whatever that thing was in the woods. I like to think that the creature, in its anger, turned on them. That it killed them all and dragged them back to wherever it came from. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. But there's one thing I still can't figure out. One thing that still haunts me. Why is it that, no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I can still hear them? When I'm alone at night in the silence, I can hear the chanting. Faint, distant, but always there, like an echo from the past. It's like they're still out there, somewhere, waiting. watching, like they're waiting for me to finish what they started. And the silence. The silence is the worst part. Because in the silence, I can hear them getting closer. So, where does that leave me? Honestly, I'm still figuring it all out. I'm miles away from Bridgewater, from that house, from those woods. I've got a new name, a new life. A fresh start, as they say. But the past, it's like a shadow always stretching out behind me, always threatening to catch up. I work a regular 9-to-5 job, nothing special. I keep to myself mostly. I have a few friends, but I don't talk to them about any of this. How could I? They'd think I was crazy, just like everyone else did, just like my parents, Leo and Sarah. Still probably think. I've tried dating, but it never really works out. It's hard to build a relationship when you're constantly looking over your shoulder, when you can't sleep with the window open, when the silence is more terrifying than any noise. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I think about going back. Back to Bridgewater, back to that house. I imagine myself walking into those woods, finding that clearing, facing whatever's left there. Maybe then, I could finally put an end to it. Maybe then, the chanting would stop. Maybe then, I could finally sleep through the night. But I know I won't. I'm too scared. And maybe, deep down, I know that it wouldn't make a difference. Because the truth is, the chanting isn't just coming from the woods. It's coming from inside me. It's a part of me now, like a scar that will never fully heal. It is the part of me that remembers the missing man, and what he probably went through. I've learned to live with it, for the most part. I take my medication, which was prescribed to me after my diagnosis. I see a therapist, even though I don't tell her everything. I keep the windows closed, the AC on, the TV playing softly in the background. Anything to drown out the silence. But every now and then, usually when I'm least expecting it, I'll hear it. That faint, rhythmic chanting, like a whisper in the wind. And I'll remember the goat man, the creature in the woods, the terror of that night. And I'll know that it's not over. It will never be over. Not really. So, I keep moving forward. I keep living my life one day at a time. I try to find moments of peace, moments of happiness, wherever I can. I try to forget, but the memory is always there, lurking beneath the surface. The memory of the woods, the chanting, the fear, and the knowledge that, somewhere out there, in the darkness, something is waiting. Waiting for the silence to return. Waiting for me. And that is my story. It's not a happy story, not a story with a neat ending. It's just my story. The truth, as I know it. And maybe, by telling it, by getting it out there, I can finally start to let it go. Maybe one day, I'll be able to sleep with the window open again, but I doubt it.